Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Film Seizure. I'm Jason Oliver, and with me are my two co-hosts, Jeff Arbuckle. Say hello, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going?
And another guy. What's his name? Chuck? Say your name, Chuck.
What's up? It's Chuck Moore coming to you live from my house.
C.W. Moss.
Yep, C.W. Moore.
We rob banks. Yes, today's episode is 1967's Bonnie and Clyde. I kind of picked this one because I'm going down this new Hollywood rabbit hole right now, and
I don't think any of us noticed, Jason.
And this movie has been is heavily featured in the things I've been reading as the potential first or one of the first films of the new Hollywood era. The era of movie making where the directors and the auteurs took over the studios and had basically carte blanche to do whatever they wanted because the studios were in such financial disarray and the people who led them didn't really know. They were so out of touch with what people wanted to see that they really kind of turned over the reins to the director. And that's where you had the kind of the rise of the Coppolas and the Spielbergs and the De Palmas and such. So this movie, while it is regarded as one of the first of the new Hollywood, it's also regarded as one of the last of the old Hollywood. It's a transitional film. And the reason for that is kind of a few different reasons. It still had to play by the studio's rules. It really almost didn't get made. Warren Beatty had to really fight to get this made. There's a story that he got down on his hands and knees and kissed Jack Warner's feet to allow him to get this movie made, which everyone says happened except Warren Beatty. So yeah, it's interesting. This movie, I saw it for the first time. Oh, I don't know, probably in the late '90s, early 2000s. It's not a movie I grew up with. It's not a movie I have particularly any nostalgia for. It's not even a movie that I particularly like a lot. It's fine, but I find its place in history interesting and where it's clashed with the culture of the day and the things that it or the doors that it opened in movies and in cinema in the United States. I find all of that very interesting, and that's mostly the kind of color and flavor I want to bring to this episode personally while we talk about the movie. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff or Chuck if you want to maybe give your personal history on this film and general thoughts.
Yeah, so this is probably one that I saw roughly around that same, sometime in the 90s, I'm sure. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I like this movie. However, I think that there's some, I think where I kind of want to talk about this is, this movie was kind of highly thought of as being kind of the catalyst for things getting much more violent in movies and TV. Of course, here 55 years later, doesn't seem that violent.
Right.
Not, it's like seeing this and the last violent movie that I saw, which was, well, I mean, even compare this to maybe something like Silence of the Lambs, and even though Silence of the Lambs has a violence in it, there's a lot of implied kind of psychological violence in this in that movie that I think is a lot harsher than this movie. But I mean, not that long ago I saw the new Evil Dead movie. This ain't got nothing on that, and even that I felt wanting more out of it.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right, because you have to kind of take this movie in the context of when it came out. Yeah.
And I think that there is also an interesting mirroring of like when this movie came out versus what it's representing of
Mm-hmm.
Depression era outlaws. I would also say that if we were to use Red Letter Media's scale of based on true events type of thing, this would not rank very high, I don't think. I mean, I like the basis, of course, these are real people,
Right.
but there is romanticization while at the same time not really. And that's one thing I'm going to talk about later as I watch this.
Cool.
I do think that the 5 performances in this are all excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very worthy of each one of them being nominated for an Oscar, which is very rare. In fact, the only other time I can think of this happening is Everything Everywhere All at Once, where every single top performer got an Oscar nomination. And it was fun seeing Roseanne Connor's mom in an early role. Estelle Parsons.
Oh, Estelle Parsons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She's I would describe her as a handsome woman.
Yeah. That's a good way of describing it, because like she seems like a very realistic, like, I ain't surprised that she's married to Gene Hackman in this movie. It's like, yeah. But no, I generally I like this movie. I think that what I find myself most attracted to in a physical and in a very kind of connective way is Faye Dunaway in this movie. I think she carries a lot of this movie. And she's likable, while I think Bonnie probably was not a likable person in real life. Probably. Anyway, we'll talk more about that stuff, because this also, I think, connects back to our Western month a lot.
Oh, sure. Absolutely it does.
So, Chuck, I'll stop talking. You go.
Okay, so I don't have a whole lot of history with this movie, if any at all. A lot of it looks familiar. I think it probably played on TV when I was a kid. I can imagine it was on like Turner, one of Turner's channels or something like that. So I'm familiar with it, but I don't think I've ever sat down and watched it. I thought it was fine as well. I don't think it's a great movie, but I get the historical significance and how it impacted film, and maybe, as Jason mentioned, New Hollywood stuff. That's all very interesting to me. So I might be able to add a little bit of color on some of these things. The movie's pretty straightforward, so I don't think there's a whole ton to dissect about it itself necessarily, like the story. But yeah, I also dug the performances quite a bit for most people.
Yeah. Chuck, you'd seen like the final scene where they get gunned down, right? It was maybe the most familiar part, because I feel like that gets shown in clip type of situations often.
That, and I think the scene where he robs the bank, but it's not a bank anymore, I think has been shown in places. I don't know why, but I'm like, I've definitely seen this before.
That almost felt like a Mel Brooks moment.
It is.
That's
ahead,
interesting.
Jason.
You bring that up, because that's a lot of at least Paul and Cale specifically talks about the juxtaposition of the comedy with the seriousness of it, right? Because a lot of people in the theaters, I guess at the time when they saw this movie, thought it was a comedy. It played like a comedy for them. The kind of hillbilly flats and scruggs music with the old timey cars and the botched bank robberies and all of that, right? The impotent lead played by Warren Beatty, like it all felt spoofy to a lot of people.
Right.
And then the violence hits, right? And that, I think, is why people had such a strong reaction. And one of the reasons, at least, to why people had such a strong reaction to the violence is because it was almost like a rug being pulled out from under them.
Yeah, it's that is kind of funny, because that's one of the things that you talk about Paul and Cale. That's the thing that Roger Ebert always hated about David Lynch, is he doesn't know what he's supposed to feel watching a Lynch movie. And that's like one of his biggest no-nos. It's like, well, what am I supposed to think? What am I supposed to be doing here? And so, yeah, I mean, but I can kind of understand that, right? Because like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in this where you kind of chuckle along. And, you know, and it's like, and I guess I'll go ahead and talk about it. I say that, you know, some people say, well, this is like it's it's like, you know, it glorifies this, you know, it romanticizes these two characters. I mean, yeah, I guess like on a true romantic level, it's like the way they meet is not the way they met in real life. And, some of the stuff about like, it seems as though Bonnie is just bored and looking for, although if you go more with that they ran in similar circles, like in real life, it seems like she probably wasn't just bored. They just figured out that they would rob banks together or something like that. But I don't know too much about the historical side, but I do find it interesting that they never are very successful in this movie.
No.
Even when they successfully rob banks, I mean, it's Gene Hackman who directly says, you know, well, there wasn't much there, or, you know, or isn't much there. And I think Gene Hackman's the one who says it's tough all around, or everywhere it's tough, or something like that, talking about the Depression. So it's like, they don't have big scores. They don't try to show them having big scores. I mean, they have enough money where they're dressed nicely. They never buy a car. They just steal cars. You know, it's like they're not, this life that they are living is not a good one.
It's weird to me. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, and the last thing I was just going to say to that was that to me, it doesn't seem glorified at all or romanticized. You know, I mean, Billy the Kid sure looked like he had a much better life in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid than Bonnie and Clyde do.
Yeah, I think the romanticizing thing, like people criticizing it for that, doesn't make sense to me, because the people of the time during the Great Depression were rooting for Bonnie and Clyde. So taking that same perspective in the movie makes a whole lot of sense to me, to put you in like the position of the people who are going through the Depression and rooting for these people. Like they're not Robin Hood exactly, but they feel like Robin Hood. You know, they don't take from the people, at least in their minds.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely pointed out scenes where, you know, like a meaner villain would have shot the guy in the bank who says, yeah, we failed 3 weeks ago. You know, a lesser, you know, I'm not sure who at that time would have been.
Yeah, I mean, they made Clyde out to be nonviolent unless he had to be, and then once the ball started rolling, is when things get kind of out of control. Yeah.
And you know, I would say it's kind of funny because, you know, 15 years later, Warren Beatty definitely plays a real bad villain in a much nicer way with Bugsy. And it's kind of funny where it's like he's in Bonnie and Clyde and he's in Bugsy, and in Bugsy that is the romanticized version of a pretty ruthless guy.
Yeah.
And he's likable in that. You know, in a way you feel sorry when he gets gunned down, but in real life it's probably for the best that he didn't make it. But in Bonnie and Clyde, he's kind of a lovable loser in some ways, you know, where they're not making off with big hits at the banks.
So I don't think that the movie was criticized for romanticizing the violence so much, or even romanticizing them so much, as it was criticizing the filmmakers for not giving anyone a moral center, for not I guess there is a romanticization there to some degree, but
Well, certainly the
to this point in
romanticizing
time,
part
yeah,
is
to this
it's the
point in time, like
relationship.
these types of stories, Bonnie and Clyde, even Bonnie and Clyde stories, that were veiled as Bonnie and Clyde movies, but were named different characters and had different types of setups and plots, but they were Bonnie and Clyde stories that were getting around film code, Hays Code stuff. They always portrayed the Clyde character as someone who was cornered, who had no choice, who was just doing what he had to do, right, to survive, and in the end he made a moral choice that redeemed him, right? So to not have that in this movie, whether it's romanticizing them or not, it just tells a more immoralistic story, a story without any real moral, I guess, right? So
I guess you kind of reap what you sow. I don't know if you can relate that definitely to morality, but
sure, there's a consequence. Yes.
I mean, that's what moral tales are all about, right? Is like, so maybe characters don't have morals, but the story is a moral kind of story, right? Like what are those?
I mean, it isn't and isn't. I think it just kind of appeals to what you want to pull out of it. It doesn't really tell you to think any specific way, I don't think. Because like Jeff said, they are buffoons. Or maybe that was you, Chuck. They're really like not heroes. It's hard to romanticize them when they're not really very good at what they do. But
The only person who I don't think is a buffoon in this, or who isn't played exceptionally broadly, is Bonnie.
yeah, but she also kind of just
She kind of falls into all of it.
she has her moments too.
Right.
But but I guess what they kind of represent is this, and I guess it's kind of like what the movie Natural Born Killers tried very badly to also convey, is a sense of fame, right? And what that means, right? Like everybody loves fame and glamour. All right. And what does that mean in the context of this movie? What does that mean in the context of 1967? A time when Andy Warhol is talking about everybody having their 15 minutes, right? So it's like, it's appealing to an anti-establishment mentality.
Which is what I was saying about, like, it's the 60s in a way kind of reflecting some of that era, the Depression era not gangsters, but outlaws.
Mm-hmm. And it scared the old curmudgeons, right?
Sure.
It scared old Hollywood. It scared everyone's parents, right? It's like, these are the types of movies that are getting made now, and yeah, it's like there is a sense of, oh no, this is what it's going to mean to be a hippie or to be an anti-war protester or whatever was going on, in the late 60s. It was a volatile time. So a movie like this is looked upon by the establishment as a match.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of sitting there thinking, it's like, in a way, this movie kind of also gives birth to some of the 70s exploitation era.
100%.
Where, the anti-hero and there's two things going on in in the latter half of the 60s. There's a movie like this, and there are movies like, the biker movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those,
Like the Peter Fonda biker movies. Yeah.
No. I was talking about like biker gang movies.
Well, yeah, like the Peter
I'm not
Fonda,
talking. No.
the wild one, wasn't that?
Yeah. What that started earlier in the 60s, but by the time after this movie, you get to movies like, where the biker gang isn't the peaceful guy seeking America going across the country. It's the raping and murder. They're almost played like Vikings, of raping and pillaging the peaceful town.
Easy Rider can kind of take some of the credit for that as well. We should probably talk about it at some point.
I don't think I think Easy Rider's trying to buck against that.
Well, the biker movie was dying though.
Well,
before Easy Rider. It gave the biker movie new life. So by that extension, everyone was looking to squeeze as much juice as they could out of that genre.
yeah, but I mean, like I would say the earlier than Easy Rider, the biker gang movies that would come along in the early 70s matched more of the mid 60s where you would have bikers driving around with Nazi paraphernalia on.
Yeah.
That's not Easy Rider. It's just that, hey, Easy Rider, hey, people want to watch biker movies again, sure. But like the tone of the movies is not Easy Rider. It's the opposite. And Easy Rider kind of bucked against that by saying, no, this is what the real counterculture movement is about, trying to find the good and as opposed to, well, I mean,
I don't know about all that. Most of that movie was like half of them didn't even know what they were making when they were making it. It just kind of got lucky. But
well, no, but I mean, but like the whole
I don't think there's a whole underlying message under it, really.
Well, there is kind of the seeking the America of their, but like there is kind of a seeking America kind of aspect to that.
But it did.
Looking for the reality of.
But it was a movie like this one where people like Bonnie and Clyde, where people saw themselves in it.
Sure.
Right. They
sure.
saw something about themselves, about their state of being, about the state of society that they could glean and feed them. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
And it's kind of funny too, because it's not too long after this movie where a lot of things change economically and where you really do start seeing that kind of separation of middle class to upper class. And it's like, you see a movie where the people robbing the banks or pulling off these, these kind of crimes, this high larceny basically is in a way seen as kind of almost likable people, or at least people you can kind of root for. And you're worried about that. And yet just a few years later, you start shifting. You end up snowballing a something that ends up creating a lot of disparity between, in the same type of situation where it's like people become desperate, and they need to do something basically for survival, which Clyde kind of makes that point in this movie where it's like, hey, we can't, this is just what we're good at right now. But when the depression ends, we'll go and do something that, it's like, yeah, he's kind of bullshitting, but at the same time, well,
yeah,
they are stealing money instead
he's
of
definitely bullshitting because the depression isn't what drove them to crime. It became the excuse, right?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. But in this, it doesn't really feel like that. It doesn't really feel like that they are making an excuse out of the depression. They're just, hey, isn't it cool that I've got this gun? And she kind of touches it like it's his penis, and then he goes and uses it. And then doesn't use his other one.
And doesn't use his real penis.
Right.
What is the damn point of the impotency in this movie?
I'll tell you.
Tell me. I'm serious.
Yeah, no, I'm serious too. Because I was trying to figure out, it's like, was Clyde Barrow really impotent?
No.
Okay.
No, he was not. At least he may have been bisexual. That
was another thing I was going to ask about too. Was that
here is I'm trying to make this as short and concise as possible.
Like his penis.
The writers, David Newman and Robert Benton, the writers of this movie, they were inspired by the French New Wave. They were inspired by Truffaut, Godard when they wrote this movie. They were writing it. They wrote it for Truffaut. They're like, we want you to direct it. They begged him until he finally gave in. And he said he would direct it. But he still wasn't really feeling it. He'd already kind of gone down that well with a few films like Shoot the Piano Player and things like that. So he actually gave it to Warren Beatty. He said, you should check this out. And Warren kind of, he asked David and Robert for a copy of the script. He called him up, said, I'm coming over. Truffaut said, you got a movie for me. He picks it up that day. and he starts to read it. Well, they were getting really nervous about him reading it because they had been turned down by everyone. And the reason that they got turned down was because the script was too transgressive. Clyde was bisexual. There was a menage a trois with him, Bonnie, and CW. So the only way he could get erect is if CW was in the mix, basically, right? And they really played all around all of that. Very French, wasn't going to fly in the U.S. When the writers asked Warren Beatty what page he was on, he said, I just started, or I'm on like page 15 or something like that. Well, they were like, well, call us when you get to 25. That was the scene with the menage a trois. And he called him back and said, I see what you mean, but I still want to do it. Well, he did want to do it. He just didn't want to play Clyde that way. And Arthur Penn, who Warren Beatty eventually got to signed on to direct, he didn't want it either. He's like, look, we're dealing with enough as it is already. The violence, these bank robbers, not really having a moral center or a moralistic character to root for. It's like we can't throw in homosexuality and expect not to lose our audience, right? It's just too much for people to handle. So they took it out, but the compromise was to make Clyde impotent. And so it just doesn't really kind of work, does it? It's like either stick with it or don't have it. The fact I think that they allow him to have his his sex at the end, like after the poem is published and he's truly famous, now he's able to get erect and consummate his love with Bonnie. It feels like so unsophisticated against the rest of the movie, But yeah, I mean, that's why it's there. It's there because even CW's even in the room, right? It was all in the script. They just had to just tone it down just enough to one, get it made, and number two, for Warren to play the role.
Wait, where was CW in the room when they had sex? Finally, they were out in the middle of the field.
Oh no, I mean like he sleeps in their room.
Oh yeah. And
Bonnie has a very seductive, if you will, reaction to his tattoo as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like there's a
lot of implied things happening there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's like it most definitely implied multiple times and actually shown multiple times that it seems as though Michael J. Pollard and Faye Dunaway are the couple in this, at least the side couple right in front of Warren Beatty.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are times where they touch each other and it's like, that's a thing going on there.
Yeah.
Like
I do think that works.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, it absolutely does. They have a really interesting relationship because they very rarely interact directly verbally to one another,
mm-hmm.
yet they physically interact with one another. And it's kind of funny because it's like the first time where you see that they're more attuned on the same wavelength is the funniest thing I think happens in the movie is when CW decides to park the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the dumbest thing on the planet. And then they so they have to book it out of town and they stop at a movie, I think, to try to get the heat off of them. And they're both more or less more interested in the movie while Clyde is pissed. It's like, you made me kill a guy, basically.
Well, I don't know. Bonnie is.
Well, Bonnie definitely.
CW is just sitting there crying.
Well, yeah, he's bothered by the fact that they killed somebody, but like, they seem to be more childlike, in different, like, they seem to be more immature in the same way with two different reactions in that scene.
That's one of the problems I kind of have with this movie is the unevenness in almost all of the characters. Like, CW is I don't know what the right term to use here is, but he's not very bright for for 90% of the movie. And then he has
There's only one thing he's good at.
But there's two moments in the movie where his speech becomes real clear, and he's talking once when he's talking to the wife of Clyde Barrow's brother. I forget her name. Sorry, Blanche.
Oh yeah,
he's talking to Blanche, and he's like very clear, and his accent goes away, and like it's just weird. And there's multiple moments in this movies where characters are just like not themselves for the purpose of the story.
Yeah,
almost.
I can kind of see that. I think one thing when it comes to CW is that there's an easy fix for anything like that with CW, and that is give us time frame, because he starts off as a kid. And he does kind of mature by the end.
Yeah, but he's also a goof when they're getting away. So, I mean...
Well, yeah. He is, but that's...
He's acting like the kid that he was at the beginning of the movie. So there's just unevenness. If there's progression there, it's really definitely not given to you in a meaningful way.
I would say one thing... I definitely see what you're saying. If there's one thing I would say about that, is that that's the last time he sees him. It's almost like he's feeling the things that he used to feel the first time before everything went really bad. It's his last kind of time to experience that.
So how long did transpire in this movie? Is it years? Months?
It's supposed to be like 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
But no, we don't get any frame of reference for that. We barely get frame of reference of all the different places the Bonnie and Clyde actually did go. In 3 or 4 years, I mean, they went from Texas to Missouri to Indiana to Kentucky to, to Illinois to, they were killed in Louisiana. They don't make any mention of that.
Right.
I mean, if you're morbidly curious, you can see the actual film that the posse took of the aftermath of them shooting Bonnie and Clyde. That's on YouTube. No. Yeah.
No, not really interested. So I do think it's worth mentioning, and I think this is true. We ate in one of the banks that they robbed. I'm pretty sure that Bonnie and Clyde...
I don't know if that was or not, but yeah, that's what we always like to think.
That's what we like to think. I mean, it used to be a bank, and they made a pretty dang good tenderloin, and they had some pretty dang good sweet potato fries.
I think I investigated this once, and it was one, but I'm not positive. Anyway, I'm trying to think of anything else that I was thinking.
I'm trying to find the quote, but somebody kind of summed up the movie by the fact that it's CW's dad who gets them caught and killed, and it's because most likely it's because he had them put a tattoo on him. Like he defiled himself for them, like getting a tattoo, which is, when you think of it in the context of long-haired hippies and everything, like in the counterculture, it's like the perfect representation of the man, right?
Right. Well, yeah, especially since the father was so like, I don't know if manipulative is the word, but he was so nice to Bonnie and Clyde to their face. Like he had a plan to trap the hippie kids, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Make them trust me, and then I'll take them out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but he might have been on their side if it weren't for that damn tattoo.
Yeah, it's like a Scooby-Doo thing. I would have been on your side if it wasn't for that damn tattoo. There is a scene that's really weird to me, and I was wondering what you guys thought about it. When Bonnie finally gets to go see her mother.
Yeah.
That picnic that they're at is kind of hazy, and it's shooting, like it looks different than the rest of the film, and it looks like a funeral.
Yeah, they're all wearing black.
Everyone's dressed in black. It's like the family looks all sad. The only one having fun at the whole damn thing is Buck Barrow. Like, it's really kind of a weird scene.
Well, they're the kids like Bonnie is having some fun with her, like with her nieces and nephews.
No adults are having fun with each other is more what I meant. The
Yeah.
kids,
Now, I don't know, Jason. What did you think? Because
This is by design. This is by design.
it's supposed to be a funeral, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you why I know this. The scene with Gene Wilder, when that was in the original script, that was supposed to happen after she goes back to meet mom. Well, our buddy Robert Towne, who we've talked about several times, most notably in our Chinatown episode, he came in to kind of do a script doctoring work. This is actually the first movie that he's kind of widely credited for quote unquote saving as a script doctor without getting any real credit. He took the scene with The Undertaker and Gene Wilder and Bonnie saying "Get out" and put that before they go back to meet Bonnie's mother, to give everything that happens after it an impending doom. And then with that, giving that scene more of a funeralistic feeling, setting. It you know, some of it I think is intentional, and some of it is just because you already have it in your head that they are on the path to their deaths, right?
Yeah, it's definitely and is punctuated by that line about, you know, when she says, I want to live in this area, and she's like, well, you may live only a mile away, but you
only have about 8 hours to live or something like that.
Yeah, you'll be dead soon after.
Be dead
or something.
in 3 days or something like that. That was also a Robert Towne line. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because at first I wondered the same thing. Then I thought, well, they're religious. And it's like, no, they've already given Bonnie her funeral, which is interesting because Bonnie's funeral, her family could not even get to see her body or get to the gravesite. So many people showed up to view the thing. Her family couldn't actually get next to the grave. So in a way, yeah, it's like this is the funeral that was given. Interestingly, the real Blanche and Warren Beatty were friends for 20 years before she died in the late 80s.
The real Blanche, huh?
The real Blanche, because he went and asked to use her real name,
huh? And
she did. She approved of the script, did not like the performance, called her a screeching horse's ass. But she turned over a new leaf. She got out on good behavior after 6 of her 10 years, got a real job, completed her parole, got remarried, had kids.
Yeah, I wouldn't have liked the performance either. She Stella Parsons is definitely played for laughs.
Oh my God! When she takes off down the fucking road, screaming her head off when the cops come
with the butcher knife.
Yes, I'm laughing my ass off.
It's funny as hell. It is. Yeah.
And Gene Hackman chasing after her. It's after she started chasing after him.
Interesting anecdote. You mentioned the cinematography, Chuck, and kind of that hazy sort of soft focus. It's throughout a lot of the movie. Burnett Guffey, the cinematographer, hated it. He was doing what he was told by Arthur Penn and Rob Redford, Warren Beatty. He didn't want to shoot the picture that way, but they told him to, and he won the damn Oscar for it.
That's hilarious. There's some really nice shots in this movie.
Oh yes, there are.
Oh, you think you're in Texas the whole time. I mean, like, you think you're looking out the window into Texas the whole time. You know, it feels like you are there. You know.
Yeah,
I think I'm the very first time I noticed like the camera is that matchstick shot, right?
Oh yeah,
because it's like close in and it kind of cranes back. It's a great shot.
Yeah, and it's a cool shot, and it also like gave me the feeling of Gasoline and Fire. Mm-hmm. Like this guy is gonna blow everything up.
He's literally playing with fire, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and then there's a scene where their car is shot between branches of a tree, and it's like perfectly framed. I'm like, how the fuck do you do that on a moving car? Like, there's just cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't know why I always like things shot through trees. Like when they frame something with trees, like it's always appealing to me.
We'll call it the Chuck Static.
Chuck Static. This got quite the Chuck Static. See, you can see his face through the trees. It's beautiful.
I kind of want to go back a little bit to Michael J. Pollard because
yeah.
I do like him a lot as a and last week I mentioned that Elijah Cook Jr. For some reason I always thought he was in this movie, and it's not that I got him confused with Michael J. Pollard. I just thought he was another guy in this movie. I was totally wrong about that. He's not in this movie at all. But Michael J. Pollard, first of all, to call him impish would be exactly correct. Like, if he could,
I wonder where you're going to go with that.
Like they really missed out at some point, and maybe if Superman 4 wasn't like a total shit show, maybe they could have cast him as Mr. Mixapitalik.
Mixoplex?
Yeah.
However you say it.
And he would have been perfect. He's also in an awesome episode of the original series of Star Trek, right before this movie, where he plays like, basically they go to this planet where all like these kids are in charge because all the adults got this disease and died. And basically once you become an adult, you get the disease. And, and he acts like a kid in that. And so I guess he was just kind of practicing for a year later when he got to play CW.
Well, he was in the biker pick, the Wild Angels with Peter Fonda the year before this.
Yep. And we've seen him before. He was Bug Bailey and Dick Tracy.
Yep.
In fact,
Warren Beatty's nothing if not loyal.
That's exactly right.
Warren Beatty. I don't know.
Horror heads would recognize him as Stucky in House of a Thousand Corpses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that just like shows up everywhere.
He's got a face. Sure does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like I recognized him right away in that, like, in my mind, he's 50 years older all the time than he is as this character. But I'm like, oh, that's definitely him. But
when you kind of need a weirdo, he's your man.
Yeah.
But no, and I do feel sorry for him for most of this movie because it does kind of feel like when they pick him up, it seems very obvious that they are doing that they're not like he knows how to fix cars. We could use somebody like that.
Right.
I mean, he had a choice though. He had a choice, but you can't help but think that they're taking advantage of him.
Absolutely. And there is a little bit of flirtatiousness with Faye Dunaway in that scene too, where, it's like this kid doesn't have a chance. He's going to go and try to be the big man that he thinks Clyde is and be around a pretty lady like Bonnie is. Of course. It's like this guy has no chance and they kind of know it. And they are kind of predatory about it.
He's shucksing like that whole scene, like
oh yeah, and
kicking the ground and
and then he's by the end of that scene he's selling himself to them.
Yeah, they say prove it, and he steals the money, and they're like, "That's good enough for us."
Get in
the car, CW Moss. You're in.
Yeah, you're in. You got it. But yeah, I don't think he knew what he was. He obviously didn't know exactly what he was getting into. It's like there's no such thing as a gang of bank robbers that don't kill people.
Well, there was until he was involved.
Well, that's true.
It's kind of his fault that they had to kill somebody. Not even kind of. It's his fault it's his fault in a way, but in reality, I don't think the trigger need to be pulled in that scene.
No, I mean, like,
either.
It's very, very clear that because Warren Beatty kind of does that rambling thing where it's like it's like he got the drop on it, and it's like he's very clear that he's trying to speak very. He's nervously talking fast to try to clear himself.
Oh, with his brother?
Yeah, it's like it's like he what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed? He got the drop on us, and it's like, dude, you didn't have to. You could have just opened the door and kicked him off the car. Right. There were other ways to deal with that guy, and he took all the wrong ways.
Right. I mean, I guess when you're I've never been in a moment where I might get caught for a bank robbery. Like,
that's fair.
Who knows the choices that you're going to make there in your fear.
Well, he's not. The guy wasn't. He was just on the side of the car. He didn't have a. He's not. He doesn't have a gun on him.
Yeah,
if it was a cop that's trying to shoot into the car, okay.
I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying you never know what someone's going to do when they're fearful that they might get caught.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of those classic examples of, well, there's a gun in this situation, so it increases the chance of death by about 100%. Yeah.
For sure.
I got a weird factoid for you.
Do it.
It has sort of very little to do with this particular movie, but it has to do with Bonnie and Clyde in cinema. So I've established that the writers of this movie were big French New Wave fans. Big Francois Truffaut fans, like major Francois Truffaut fans. I mean, the script they wrote is kind of an amalgam of Jules and Jim and Shoot the Piano Player, right? But told through the Bonnie and Clyde legend. Well, it's no surprise they wanted their hero Truffaut to do it, but I wonder if they also kind of knew that Truffaut might have a specific affinity to a Bonnie and Clyde type story because of his connection to Hitchcock. Because Hitchcock, this is so weird to me, when he made Rope, he cast the two killers, John Dahl and Farley Granger. And I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but John Dahl was Clyde in a Clyde surrogate in the 1950 movie Gun Crazy, and Farley was a Clyde surrogate in the 1948 movie They Live by Night. They were both played Clyde, right? And then he cast them as the killers in Rope. Interesting. Yeah.
Show.
And I like a lot of those, like that, They Live by Night is another one of those where it's like the rebels on the run, but they have to make good in the end, or they're only doing what they have to do because of necessity. It's just like that only way you could tell those types of stories is to put a particular spin on them because of the Hays Code.
Another interesting little factoid here that I was talking about Michael J. Pollard. Michael J. Fox adopted Jay because of that. His real middle name's Andrew.
I was going to say Pollard was in Little Foss and Big Halsey. That was another biker movie. That one had Robert Redford in it. 1970. Why I bring it up is because Little Foss and Big Halsey was the first movie that the guy from that produced The Godfather got to make, Albert Ruddy. He got the job producing The Godfather because Little Foss and Big Halsey came under budget. Didn't make any money, but it came under budget. Yeah.
I was a little surprised that, this is 1967 and Warren Beatty is the sole producer of this movie.
Yeah. he was desperate for a hit.
Which is interesting because it's like,
nobody wanted to make it. Nobody wanted to make it. Nobody wanted to direct it. He was afraid he was going to have to direct it himself. He didn't want to.
Yeah, because the first movie he directed was Heaven Can Wait, 78.
He ended up taking, I think his fee to act in it was $250,000, which was a discount, and he negotiated 40% of net, which is net. 40% of net is really not a great deal unless you really think the movie's going to be a hit, because generally, like, net can be 2 to 3 times the negative cost, and that's including all the advertising, like all striking all the prints, like everything, right? Every single amount of money that the studio puts into that movie has to be recouped by the studio before you can start claiming points on net. Usually you want to claim your points on gross. But this movie ended up making a shit ton of money. 70 million on a $2.5 million budget. $2.5 million might even be high estimate. That might be with negative costs, because I think Warren Beatty said he made it for 1.6.
Yeah, because it's weird because it's like, he had only really been in like 7 movies before this one, and And
honestly, like, they weren't particularly money makers, the movies that he was in.
Man, Splendor in the Grass.
Splendor in the Glass was like his big splash, but he really hadn't made very many like movies that made any money. Lilith and Mickey won probably, like, God, they probably lost so much money. He was desperate for a hit, and he was developing this. He was also developing What's New Pussycat, which he ended up losing almost everything to Woody Allen on that one, because the producer that he was working with kind of dumped him, and he's like, "Well, we don't need you. We're gonna roll with Woody on this." And Woody, he got kind of like street cred and like Hollywood cred for developing What's New Pussycat, but he didn't make any money off of it. But it launched Woody Allen's career.
We're gonna go with another stud. Bring in Woody Allen.
But yeah, I mean, when you really look at, like, this was Beatty's probably his first big hit. Bonnie and Clyde, like, monetarily, this is his first big hit. And he made a lot of money on it.
Which is funny because, like, his sister Shirley MacLaine, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she was a huge star. At this point.
Yeah.
So no, I think it's interesting because it's like, the director and producer Warren Beatty is, like, everything he made from like 78 on seemed like it was, he had that kind of total control on.
For sure. Yeah, it was kind of like, after Bonnie and Clyde and probably McCabe and Mrs. Miller, working with Robert Altman on that, but in both movies, he argued tooth and nail with the directors, Penn and Altman respectively. It's really kind of where he learned his craft as director. Yeah.
I don't want to direct, but I'm going to argue with the director. That's a pretty...
Well, yeah, because he knew what he wanted, right? But he didn't want to have to do all the things a director has to do and all the things a producer has to do, right?
Right.
Which is funny because it's like...
And he didn't have the confidence yet that he could do that, but he eventually did, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't direct Bugsy. I mean, that was Barry Levinson.
Yeah, that's right.
And he did avoid directing Ishtar. But he produced it, so he lost all the money, but he didn't have to...
Probably lost all the money he made on Bonnie and Clyde on Ishtar. Oh, boy.
But I've never seen that one.
I've never seen it either. I just know it's a legend.
The reputation precedes it.
Yeah.
No, so I mean, like, I don't know. This is a weird movie because, like, this is kind of one of those movies where it does kind of want you to like the protagonists, even though that they're not particular. I mean, they're not good people. They're morally bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think, I don't know, maybe it's because that we know we know what they're, it's like, we know what's going to happen to them. I guess maybe that makes them in some way, shape, or form a little bit more sympathetic, I guess. And it's like, because Bonnie and Blanche don't like each other. They kind of grate on each other, but like, you never see, like, it's like you could very easily see, like, they go and meet up with Buck, and we find out he abuses his wife or something. It's like, no, it's nothing like that.
Right.
They're just, Buck is kind of a loudmouth, but
Well, I think you're hit on something there. I think the familial aspect of the movie does lend the characters some sympathy,
mm-hmm.
right?
And there's very little, like, quabble or nothing super meaningful between the main players.
Right, they're shallow. They're all very shallow. Yes.
Well,
yeah,
but they're shallow to the point of they're also shallow that they just get along.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but that kind of makes I think that's why the narrative of this is so one note for me. Like, it feels like you're on a train and, like, you're just sitting in your chair watching the same tree go by over and over again a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like there's no real interesting things that happen between the characters. It's all outward kind of external forces, and even those are limited until the very end, right? Like, it's almost, I don't know, there's almost nothing to it half the time. Am I being too critical there?
There are a few moments. No, I don't think so. I think you're hitting on a part of the reason why I just don't care for the movie that much, right? It is kind of one note. It's interesting. It's interesting for its controversy. It's interesting for Pauline Kael's passionate defense of it in the face of the violence, which kind of opened up this whole new world of criticism and allowed movies to be more dangerous. I mean, most critics, when this movie came out, they were terrible reviews. Pauline Kael's review of it started to turn the tide, right? And it did make Hollywood safer for more movies like this to be made. The power of the critic was a real thing in the late 60s.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, most of her review is about, like, why are people so upset about the violence? Why are people so upset about the historical inaccuracies? It's like, you think they got Man for All Seasons right? It's like, but everyone loved that one, So, it's a lot of, like, just, her defense of the movie lent it so much credibility that, and she does criticize a lot of it. She criticizes the sexuality angle and, the culmination of his sexual prowess is, like, sort of this stand-in for success, right? Or for I forget what word she used, but she criticizes.
So he got to make it.
She criticizes some of the performances. She criticizes several things, right? But she defends the people. She defends the movie against the people who are just, like, blindly hating it for shallow reasons.
She's defending the art of it.
She's defending it as art. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and some of this is kind of also, this is funny because it's the first time I was reading, because I was reading some of the reception here. Because New York Times at the time is calling it a cheap piece of bald-faced slapstick comedy that treats the hideous.
Yeah.
It's like Pauline does like a freelance essay for the New Yorker defending it.
Yep.
At the time, Ebert gave it 4 out of 4. He says that milestone in the history of American movies, a work of truth and brilliance. It is also pitilessly cruel, filled with sympathy, nauseating, funny, heartbreaking, and astonishingly beautiful. And that's kind of how that's how I kind of look at it. It's like on the canvas, that's, okay, you start holding up the microscope, and I kind of agree with you guys. There are some imperfections with this, but that kind of does. I admit I felt those things watching it. He then went on to say, if it does not seem like these words should be strung together, perhaps that is because movies do not often reflect the full range of human life.
Yeah. And
so
that's
he's
something
looking at
else
it beyond the art, but like, I admit, some of those things that were strung together that probably should, I kind of can say, I kind of get, I was kind of feeling those things in that.
That's what Cale also points out as the sort of French influence, right? The French New Wave influence, that a lot of French movies at the time were being made about like American violence, American gangsters, but
Breathless is the guy trying to be Humphrey Bogart,
and bringing the poetry of humanity through in the narrative and in the art, right?
Yeah,
and that's exactly what this movie attempted to do, and I think was mostly successful in doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is largely successful at. You guys are right. This is not a perfect movie. To say that this is a great movie 55 years later, I mean,
yeah.
If you are an expert of films of this time, meaning you're right now, studying the 60s and the changeover from the old ways to the new, absolutely, this is going to be it's going to be top tier.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be wrong to take any old review and kind of criticize it against modern times,
absolutely.
Right? Because they didn't see the stuff we've seen since.
Absolutely.
So saying that this has not been done in film before, or isn't done very often, maybe we've seen it 30 times by now, or 40
absolutely.
or 50.
I mean, it's without a doubt, without this movie, I wouldn't have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I wouldn't have Chinatown. These are movies that kind of paint those pictures maybe better than Bonnie and Clyde, but paints those same pictures that I think Ebert and Cale talk about, in the sense of movies that take chances and don't work out for our heroes is important in movies.
That's an interesting one too, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because it accomplishes all of what Ebert said almost in a single setting.
Yep.
Which is
he's not driving around Texas. He's for 85% of the movie, he's trapped in an insane asylum.
Yeah,
but
with Chucky.
Right, and
here to mirror your Ebert, because I think Ebert and Cale may have been on one mind in this movie. If this way of holding more than one attitude toward life is already familiar to us, if we recognize the make-believe robbers whose toy guns produce real blood, and the Keystone cops who shoot them dead, from Truffaut's Shoot the Piano Player and Godard's gangster pictures Breathless and Band of Outsiders, it's because the young French directors discovered the poetry of crime in American life from our movies, and showed the Americans how to put it on the screen in a new existential way. Melodramas and gangster movies and comedies were always more our speed than prestigious, distinguished pictures. The French directors who grew up on American pictures found poetry in our fast action, laconic speech, plain gestures. And because they understood that you don't express your love of life by denying the comedy or the horror of it, they brought out the poetry in our tawdry subjects.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said, Pauline.
Oh, I thought that was you. No,
I
I'm just
wish.
kidding.
I wish.
It's kind of funny because, and by the time this episode comes out, if I actually go through with it, this other thing that I've been thinking about will also have been released. I've long talked about wanting to do more of like an essay type of Film Seizure at the movies for like the movie Babylon, because I have a very complicated relationship with that movie. But it's the same type of stuff. There's an ugliness to it that ends up creating something kind of nice. Now, there is also something at the end of that that's almost overly saccharine that is kind of betrays a little bit of that, but it's that whole kind of painting the picture of this using the simple fact that, sometimes people are awful, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't accomplish or inspire something great from it, and so I don't know, this is being recorded at a time that I haven't. So from the future, if I actually went through with what I wanted to do, go check that out. If I didn't do it, I'm still thinking about it. But no, we haven't really talked too much about this movie.
No.
There's not a great deal of plot in this. No. It's two people meet. They meet because Clyde is trying to steal Bonnie's mom's car. And then they end up going on a date. And he robs a general store. And at that point, they're career criminals. And we know the ending is just going to be a matter of getting there. There's no twist to this. It's barely a biography, and there is no plot. So you're kind of stuck, and I think maybe, Chuck, this could play to where you're saying that this is a little uneven, or a lot uneven at times, not having a plot and having to rely on these interesting actors doing interesting things with their characters. Then
that's what I'm saying. Their unevenness was due to the fact that they needed the characters to do something to progress the story,
right?
Instead of having something interesting outside, like, progress the story. And that makes it a weaker film to me. Like, there was a lot I liked about this movie, but there was enough I didn't like to kind of make it like not a wash necessarily. I like it a little bit more than that, but it's definitely not one that I'm going to look to, like, I need to scratch this particular itch. I'm going to bring out Bonnie and Clyde. Like, it doesn't fit that kind of place for me.
So I mean, there are other Warren Beatty movies that if I need to see something Warren Beatty, that I'd rather watch.
Sure.
Do you think the She's a Peach directly influenced True Romance? The interaction between Gene Hackman and Warren Beatty when he meets Bonnie, that had to be, right?
I mean, that's another True Romance retelling, right? Like, we talked about that during the episode.
But I mean, that's almost directly lifted. Yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah, got to be.
Well, yeah, because I mean, like, True Romance is
it's a Bonnie and Clyde movie. Yeah,
it's a Bonnie and Clyde movie I'd probably rather watch than this one again.
Yeah, I agry with that.
Because that one does have a plot. Yeah, but that has a plot too. I mean, it's I mean, this may have better performances. The other one has maybe a better plot
and more entertaining.
Certainly has a snazzier script.
For sure.
It's very interesting. The movies that were up for Best Picture this year, the movies that were up for everything this year, is very old Hollywood versus new Hollywood. You had Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, In the Heat of the Night. You had Bonnie and Clyde on the kind of the old Hollywood, right? Like kind of the safe old Hollywood, almost like old Hollywood liberal film. And then you had Bonnie and Clyde in The Graduate. Very much new Hollywood. And then Dr. Dolittle there in the middle. Stupid musical that made no money.
Well, Dr. Dolittle is that is as old as Hollywood as you could get.
Oh, yeah.
Did Guess Who's Coming to Dinner win, or did The Graduate?
No, In the Heat of the Night one.
Oh, dang.
But The Graduate won, Mike Nichols won Best Director for The Graduate.
Yeah.
Did Poitier win Best Actor that year?
No.
Because he won once, didn't he?
Rod Steiger won.
Yeah.
He was also he was the white cop in The Heat of the Night.
Interesting. I don't know enough about 60s American film.
You also had it's kind of interesting that Sidney Poitier wasn't even nominated.
Really?
Yeah.
And he was in two of his best movies, probably. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night.
He was in two best, which tells me that the voting, they canceled each other out.
Maybe,
Probably.
but he didn't get nominated for either.
No, but that's what I'm saying. You can only pick one.
Yeah, but Spencer Tracy got nominated for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and
Right.
yeah, it could be.
Oftentimes,
they should have
things
just
like that
accumulated.
Surely it wasn't racism.
They should have just accumulated his votes. Like, it should have just been for the actor, and then, he got 100
That's
for
pretty
this
weird,
one.
though.
Yeah.
And George Kennedy won his Oscar this year for Cool Hand Luke. Good old
You
George
mean
Kennedy.
Naked Guns, George Kennedy?
Yeah, Naked Guns, George Kennedy.
You know it.
That's what he's most famous for, of course.
Well, to me, absolutely.
Graduate, that's another one. That's another one we need.
Oh my God, he looks so tough in Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah.
Holy shit. I haven't seen that movie in many years, and he looks real tough in that.
But before he was Frank Draven's partner, he was a badass.
He was on a lot of tough guy movies. The Dirty Dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's got his shirt off in this, and he's looking like he could kick my ass, and he's like 50. Well, I'm almost 50, but
Yeah, you can't qualify that. He's gonna kick your ass, Chuck.
yeah. Well, I would have had him kicking my ass when I was 30 too. So
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. It's a and like I was saying, it's like this was nominated for 10 Oscars. It won only two. Estelle Parsons.
Yeah.
Probably for that scene that she took off down the road. Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
And cinematography. But this was the first year in film for Faye Dunaway. It was the really Warren Beatty's first real hit. Arthur Penn had made the Miracle Worker before this. So
but he's another guy who was way out of favor. He hadn't had a hit in a long time.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted Arthur Penn either.
But it was not uncommon for him to make a good movie, even if
No, that's very true as well.
And Gene Hackman was relatively kind of newish at that time, if I'm not mistaken. He'd been in a few things, but not too much before this. 67 was probably his biggest year.
Yeah. On the topic of Arthur Penn, so after Mickey 1 flopped in 1965, this is from Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, Penn's movie career spiraled downward. Hollywood was not a place for intellectuals, no matter how talented, and Penn suffered the kinds of humiliations routinely heaped on directors. First, he was brutally kicked off the train by the star Burt Lancaster. Then producer Sam Spiegel took the chase away from him in post-production and recut it. He was hit rock bottom, did nothing for a year and a half. It was in this moment that Beatty came knocking with Bonnie and Clyde.
Interesting.
Necessity is mother of invention. Make arguably your masterpiece at your lowest point.
Yep.
The poem, the Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde, is a real thing.
Yeah, it is.
You only read about a third of it.
Yeah.
It is a very long poem. Like I looked it up and I started going. It's like, oh my god! It's like it would have been the entirety of the front page of the paper. But it's very simplistic, but it's actually pretty well written. Maybe Bonnie could have done something else.
I like this. Also from Raging Bulls, Easy Riders. Says, if the Bond films legitimized government violence and the Leone films legitimized vigilante violence, Bonnie and Clyde legitimized violence against the establishment. The same violence that seethed in the hearts and minds of hundreds of thousands of frustrated opponents of the Vietnam War.
What's interesting is the number of heroes that were outside of the establishment trying to stop them that got hurt. Like the guy in the store that jumped on Warren Beatty when he had a gun. The guy who got shot in the face when they were getting away with the money. Those people had no...
Right.
Like nowadays they tell you just let the criminal go, right?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. That guy who got shot in the face, the first guy that Clyde kills, that was a direct homage to Battleship Potemkin. It was a very similar shot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's pretty well done. That shot.
It is.
The shot of the shot.
Shot of the shot.
Shot of the shot.
I really like my favorite scene in the movie is the scene where they're squatting in the house. Bonnie and Clyde are, and the owner comes.
Oh yeah,
by,
I was going to ask you because you had brought.
And he checks on them and checks what's going on here. He's like, I don't want no trouble. I don't want trouble. And then he offers his gun to the farmer when he finds out the bank took his house. Bank done took it or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, ain't that the Ross deal or something like that? Clyde says, and he hands him the gun. And has him shoot the windows out of the house. It's just, there's a poetry there for sure.
Well, he shoots the sign that the bank
shoots the sign that the bank took it. Yep.
No, the window was shot out by the black guy who worked the farm with them.
Oh yeah,
Both shot it.
Yeah, they both shot it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, and it's like, I don't know if Clyde was really like that, but it's a good scene kind of early on.
Right.
When you're trying to figure this guy out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be with this guy for the rest of the movie?
Right.
It's like, for all we know, he kind of sweet talked this girl who was bored into becoming
right.
Into becoming an outlaw, essentially. Do we want to be with this guy for the rest of the movie? And that scene says, yeah, we can hang out with this guy for the rest of the movie.
Yeah,
he has sympathy.
Yeah, there's a humanity there.
Yeah,
yep.
And then
he also tells her it's time to go. They don't know who you are. You can get out of this now.
Yeah.
He lets the one guy keep his money. He says that yours are the bank's.
Right.
Like there's multiple scenes.
Those are all of the backup to kind of stabilize that moment where we think, we could probably go with this.
But it probably made the first murder, all the more horrifying, right? Like,
sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Well, it certainly puts Beatty's reaction to what he had to do. It made it believable.
I believe that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and and once we meet Gene Hackman, we don't really think Buck is a killer either. if anything, you think he's just chasing, make sure you spell my name right in the paper type of guy, as if it's difficult to spell Buck. But but no, like you kind of feel like it's a, you kind of get the impression that in that first scene that he's just kind of a dummy. Yeah, he's just kind of a dummy. And he has he's married now. He's married to a preacher's daughter. And he's just kind of an uneducated hick, basically. I don't think this movie does much good for, I mean, it really kind of shows that a lot of people in Texas are probably farmers, broke, or hicks, one or the other. I mean, it is kind of one of those movies that it feels like, and this is something that's come up a lot. Like if you look at like history of film and how certain people are represented, white Texans tend to be some of the dumbest represented people, or represented the dumbest out of all of the South.
Well, it sounds like you're focusing on Texas, but they're not in Texas the entire movie. They're only there for a little bit of it.
But they are Texans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. I mean, people being broke in the Great Depression makes sense too.
Well, sure. But I mean, like when they meet and where they're from, they're kind of played early on as bumpkins, and with Clyde and Buck both being not exactly the smartest guys on the planet.
Well, Bonnie's from Texas, right? She's smart.
Yeah. Well, yes, but there are times in which she's kind of played almost naive. Like she kind of naively goes with.
I don't think so. I think she's pretty calculated, but that could be left to how you read it. Really, it's not really implicitly stated that she's naive.
I don't think she's naive either.
But
she does have a moment where she feels in over her head.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the beginning it seems like she's just kind of bored, and
she has ennui.
While not necessarily naive per se, she's very easily kind of gets swept up when this interesting guy outside tries to steal her mom's car.
Yeah,
and
when she finds it like sexual turn on that she can't. That's kind of where the impotency comes in with her, right?
Sure.
Is she can't get the gratification sexually, that this life of crime is boiling up in her, right? Because it's definitely there's a sexual aspect to this excitement for her, the robbing of banks and all that.
Right. I mean, the gun shows that immediately, right? Like Jeff mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So there's sexual frustration on her part, right?
Even the way she's drinking her Coke is very sexual.
Yeah.
Kind of.
That's why I like the implications with is it CW?
Yeah, CW Moss.
Yeah. Are there like if that movie is made today, you could go there.
You could tell the story the way. Yeah. People would still be pissed off about it.
Sure, they would.
Lots of people, but they don't have to go see it.
Well, they're assholes anyway. So
there are more people that would be less turned off by it than there were in the 60s.
Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. Interestingly, in real life, supposedly, John Dillinger sent flowers to Bonnie and Clyde's funeral.
Huh.
And I think they also said the Pretty Boy Floyd did too. 2 months later, Dillinger's dead.
Wow.
He didn't learn anything from the movie.
No.
That came out 50 years later, but
no. Yep, he learned nothing. Yeah, it's kind of funny because, like, we talked about this a little bit too with like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, right? It's like these people do kind of challenge like an old guard, right? And the old guard fights back, and how they fight back tends to be pretty dirty. And I don't think that's changed one bit in the many decades since. There is potential that Pat Garrett shot Billy the Kid in the back. John Dillinger was shot in the back. For it later to be ruled justifiable homicide. Yeah, funny how that works out when the cops are writing that story. And Bonnie and Clyde are ambushed. It's like these people aren't dying and aren't being killed in the process of committing yet another crime on their spree. They are basically ambushed and or shot in the back. It is kind of funny, which I think only helps not really turn them into martyrs, but turn them more into mythical characters than anything. It's the exact opposite. I don't know. It's interesting because, it's weird how people kind of latch on to stuff like that. And the one thing that is common among all of these stories is that when the establishment fought back against the rabble rouser, they kind of did so dirty.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have those kind of outlaws anymore, though.
No.
That are on the run and from town to town causing atrocities and like. Sure. Really, this was the end of the Wild West when Bonnie and Clyde were like shortly after. I can't remember when we would classify the Wild West as having ended, but I'm guessing it's.
It would probably. 1900. Yeah, then there was the brief, cropping up of new outlaws like Bonnie and Clyde and Dillinger and Floyd.
Yeah, so that was way more commonplace, but it's not. I think when we talked about Billy the Kid, like we expected more honor to be there.
Yeah.
Not really justice necessarily, but honor.
Right.
And yeah, obviously by the time Bonnie and Clyde are on their escapades, the idea of that kind of old honor, I think, was dead too.
Right.
So they're kind of different scenarios in my opinion, but I don't.
Well, yeah, but
just the way I see it, we weren't there.
Well, sure. And you are right, but what I'm saying is like the aftermath of like you still kind of want to romanticize Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, these folks were all famous while they were on their escapades, though.
Sure.
Billy the Kid was famous. Bonnie and Clyde were famous.
Sure.
So like there was public outcry for the way that they died. Now we have like the people that die this way are foreign, war criminals in their bunkers and shit. Sure. Like that people cheer on that death instead, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So here's something interesting on the topic of Clyde's sexuality. So the character the real life W.D. Jones, who the CW character was based on.
Well, partly he was based.
Partly, yeah, he's an amalgam, but he testified. He confessed, and it kind of is what triggered a lot of the murder warrants, I guess, against the gang. His testimony. He was convicted of murdering a deputy, but he made some testimony about kind of the sexual aspect of the gang. What does it say? I'd like to see if you can read his testimony, because he said some of them were lurid lies. It says lies that he told concerning the gang's sex lives, and this testimony gave rise to many stories about Barrow's ambiguous sexuality. So he might have been like talking shit, right? He might have been telling the truth. Yeah, might be trying to like tarnish the name of Clyde by saying that he liked guys. Who knows, right? But that's kind of where that came from. So that just wasn't conjured out of nowhere by the writers of the movie.
I wonder if he was like left behind or like a sacrifice almost, and was in a position where he'd be upset with the Barrows at that point
So it
for
said
some
that
reason.
he had left them 6 weeks after they evaded officers at Dexfield Park in July 1933, and he had left. So I don't know.
Interesting. It's interesting that they, in the story of this movie,
I think probably
kind
he
of
just.
gave.
I think maybe he just saw that
The writing was on the wall?
coming. The writing was on the wall, and was the first to confess, and they liked the stories he had to tell, so he just kept telling them. Right?
Yeah.
It's interesting that in this retelling of it, then they chose to give him a loyal ending
Yeah, that's very true.
that he does not deserve in reality.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, it could be the ending may be more the other guy. Yeah,
Could be,
so-
or it could be, they weren't
Sure.
lies, and there's more to the story, right?
Right.
It also mentioned that Clyde was repeatedly raped in prison.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He crushed that guy's skull in retribution.
Dang.
Yeah, with a pipe. Ooh.
Yeah, but yeah, it's funny. I didn't really know much about them. I did watch that movie. I did watch that movie, The Highwaymen, a couple years ago on Netflix.
Oh,
with,
yeah.
Kevin Costner. It was told from the point of
From
view.
Hamer's side, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the guy who got the picture taken with him.
Right. Yeah. Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting movie.
Yeah, actually, Clyde was never penalized for killing the guy. It was another inmate who was already serving a life sentence that took the responsibility for him. But anyway, no, I don't know. I mean, this is a, I think this is an interesting movie. I think it's a movie that probably has more of a historical importance now than it has a real, standing where people our age or people discovering it today would really, like, if you're, it would still be pretty darn good if, like I said, you're watching everything in the 60s, because it's, it's gonna be a sharp turn from here with what's going to happen afterwards. But, and unless you're watching the history of film in chronological order, you're probably not going to be overly wowed with this movie. I like it fine, but it's a movie that I think, it has a more important place than its quality.
It's a perfect movie to show in a film class.
Yeah.
To then spark a 90-minute, hour and 15 or a 115-minute discussion like we've just had about its place in history and the decisions that the filmmakers were making.
Yeah.
Because there was definitely a lot of decision making here.
Yep.
Yeah, this would also be a good...
It's filmmaking with intent.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a good... I mean, if you're building a class, and it's modern cinema, you could start with, your first film of the year of the semester would be like Citizen Kane, because of the technical elements that it came along with. And then you can have it, move over to film noir and get into like the French New Wave, and then hit this, and then after this it's Godfather, probably. So it's this would definitely be the end of the first half of that semester.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done it.
Yeah.
Anything else to add here?
No, I mean, I would recommend checking this movie out if you're curious about film in general. If you're curious about technical stuff in film, yeah, I would say this is definitely one to check out, because this is shot very well. It's acted very well, even if it is uneven at times, but it's, again, I think that's a product of it not having a real plot.
I wonder if Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty were nervous about those squib hits. That hadn't really ever been done before. I'd be a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
All right. Well, what do you got next week, Jeff?
Well, next week, go to filmseizure.com. Follow us on the various places like, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But next Wednesday,
The Fisher King.
That is absolutely correct. So that is some Jeff Bridges, Robin Williams, Terry Gilliam goodness.
Yep. We go on another search for the Holy Grail with Terry Gilliam.
Well, we've already gone on one with Excalibur. I think that ended fairly successfully.
That one just didn't go. We just didn't go with Terry on that one.
Yeah, no, we went with Terry Gilliam on that one.
Yeah. So Fisher King next Wednesday morning, filmseizure.com. Check those things out. Also at filmseizure.com on Monday of next week is my next episode of Monster Mondays, Frogs, starring a very young Sam Elliott. I actually kind of like this movie. It gets blasted. I think it's actually a pretty decent little man versus nature kind of monster movie. So check that out. Same places that I had mentioned, filmseizure.com. This upcoming Friday at my website, bmovieenema.com, I have a review of Graduation Day. Fun little slasher. So check that out at my site. But yeah, Fisher King next week. We apparently we're spending a lot of time in 1991, 1992 era lately, and that's quite all right by me. I like that. I have a feeling I have more to say about 1991 the following week when we have our next discussion episode. But we'll learn more about that next week when we finish things up with the Fisher King. Until next week, I am Jeff Arbuckle.
I'm Chuck Moore.
I am Jason Oliver, and you have been listening to Film Seizure.